I think in today's world, there's tons of room for a great hard rock band to actually break huge. I think there's a demand for it. They used to refer to hard rock bands and metal bands as cults, when they owned the world. But we were all in a cult, basically. We had a cult following of millions of people. Now, a cult to me is a cult following would be you have 12 of your best friends. That's a cult following. But the record industry always referred to the hard rock genre as a cult following from a fan base point of view. So I think there's room for another cult following of millions of people liking hard rock. It's just somebody has to break out. There has to be a band that decides to go in, put in their 10,000 hours, learn their instruments, write great songs, and it'll be there and put on a great show. And people will come. It has to happen because there's nothing else to see out there. If you go, Motley Crue and all the bands that keep touring, they draw huge crowds everywhere. So I think there's tons of room for somebody to do it. You have to go out and you got to play and you got to put in your time and you have to have great songs and great talent. Mutt Lange, who were the world's greatest producers, created Def Leppard in Nashville. He changed country music. One guy. He changed the entire sound of country music. Now country, they got bigger shows than rock shows. They're the rock bands of the 80s are now the country acts of today. They got the best shows, they got the best songs, they got the best musicians, they got the best records. As far as pop bands and rock bands, I mean, it's really hard. Everybody hates Nickelback, but I always loved Nickelback because they were a rock band. They've had guitar solos, they had good musicianship. Their songs were really good. Just because everybody hated them because they sold millions of records and for no other reason. So the fans certainly liked them, as far as I can tell. And I think because nobody else was doing what they were doing, they stood out. And today's artists, other than Nickelback, who's really almost a classic rock band now, they've been around for a while, but today's artists, I don't know how to describe it, but they don't understand, I don't think they understand anyway, the positioning of melody on their own without a lot of help. There's no need for them to be really good musicians if they happen to play, because you can hire other guys to do that for you. And singers, you have auto-tune. So, anybody could be, if you're good looking, could be a star in the studio, but it comes to live, they're not going to cut it. And that's part of the problem, is the acts that don't cut it live. They have no idea how to perform. They look like a bunch of slobs. And you need to have that separation so people look up to you and they respect you and you're something different. It's just like a Broadway show, or it's, or a great rock concert, or a great movie. It's like if nobody dressed up in a period piece in a movie, like the period piece was, it wouldn't be a period piece anymore. So it's not just music alone that makes a difference. It's everything else that goes around it. The record companies and the radio stations, really, they used to be the gatekeepers of music and the developers of music. And they were a partnership that sometimes wouldn't agree on everything. But that partnership would give artists the opportunity to actually expand their fan base, have their music listened to, and the opportunity for some longevity in the business. Today, it's like, all the same 5-10 producers, writers make all the records along with the artist. And if it's not a hit in 10 minutes, you're out the door. You don't have a deal anymore. You're back working at McDonald's. So it's become, again, no artist development means you're not going to have any growth in the industry at all. And I think that at some point the industry is going to, maybe, if there still is an industry, wake up and actually do something about that. The roots of all music certainly goes back to the classics and the classical composers. They were the ones that really developed what we know now as melody and arrangement and dynamics. Following that, I guess for rock and roll, there was influence. Obviously, when you look at bands like even Zepp or certainly Yes, very classically influenced. And that's important because it created a whole new tonal value, oral, I guess is a better word. And it opened rock fans' ears to that style of music, the classical music. Of course, the blues influenced everybody in the rock and roll, without question. It gave the electric guitar with distortion a blues feel. It gave Eric Clapton the ability to hit a note and make it sing. And it gave all the vocalists something to work from. So the British were amazing. I mean, they're the best copyists in the world. But then they took the creative process and made it a craft as well. So they were able to turn the blues into rock. Certainly in the early days, it was mainly British bands that were imported into America. They were the ones that were the originators. Then it grew into, when the record companies realized how much money there was in this, they started signing American acts. And while they were signing Janis Joplin, I don't think we had a rock band in Canada. It didn't really exist. I think because there was no recording scene here. There wasn't any record companies. There was just distributors. Probably Duff Roman was the first guy to start recording acts here, David Clayton Thomas and Little Caesar and the Consuls in the 60s. But there was no real outlet. Radio didn't play them really. There was a couple of hits, but there was no album radio stations here either. There was no WNEW or a KSAN in San Francisco that played all this unique new stuff. As the clock ticked forward, there was more Canadian bands that got into rock. So you had, if you want to call the Guess Who a rock band, certainly they were one of the originators. Then, from a real rock perspective and not a top 40 singles type perspective, I suppose Rush was, probably the earliest originator. Then came Triumph, and then came Heart, and then came Loverboy, and then came God knows who, Toronto, and all these bands. All of a sudden there was a vibrant recording scene because people were making money off music. But from a rock perspective, like a hard rock perspective, which was kind of my life, Rush was kind of the originators. I mean, we followed in their shoes as Triumph because they opened all the doors. So, they opened the door this much and we drove 5 semis through it because we just wouldn't take no for an answer from anybody. And there was a time, I think it was in the 81, 82, 83 time, where on American rock radio, the top 5 records were all Canadian, top 5 albums. So I don't think Canadian bands are overlooked in the whole classic rock kind of idiom. I think it's radio stations perhaps overlook them sometimes, but the good classic rock stations pick up the songs from that time period and beat the heck out of them on air.
Would you be able to name the albums that you're referring to?
Well, the bands were Rush, Triumph, Heart, Loverboy, and I'm trying to remember the 5th. There's 4 for sure, and a little research will probably find you the 5th. That's a pretty good position to be in, being that we're a 5% market, basically. So 5 out of every 100 records that get airplay should come from Canada. When you think about America, so we got our fair share, but it was a lot of work. I think the punk movement actually expanded the hard rock movement. I think that by virtue of they were so off base from what the rock movement was doing, musically speaking, that it attracted a whole new set of people into the fan base, so to speak, and the people that would go buy records. Because if you liked punk, you really didn't like hard rock. So I think it was a very valuable addition to the musical scene because there was room for it.
What was it about the difference from hard rock and punk? Like, what distinguished punk from hard rock, essentially?
I think the major difference are the songs and the musicianship. Like you could not be able to play very well and play in a punk band. If you knew 3 chords, you were away to the races if you were a guitar player. And pretty much a lot of those guys, that's all they did. But they were angry. You know, that was I think for me anyway, the overall thesis of punk was anger. You look at some of the bands, their lyrics were basically, I'm mad about this and I hate this and I don't want this. So they were like a movement that for the dissatisfied.
How did Triumph begin?
Well, my father was a musician. You know, he played in the Toronto Symphony. He played stand-up bass, and was also a jazz guy. So I was at home. I was always exposed to all kinds of different music, which was kind of cool. And my sister was maybe a year and a half older than me, so she you know had Little Richard 78s, Good Golly Miss Molly, and stuff like that. And then I never really got into the music at all until 45s came out, and then you know I used to go buy them every day if I could. But in high school, you know, started a band, and there was very few bands back then anyway. We're talking a long time ago. So, you know, we had, I don't know how many, 4 guitar players, 5 guitar players, a drummer, no bass player, and a keyboard player. So we got rid of a couple of guitar players, and I ended up being the 3rd guitar player, and everybody came to me and said, you know, Mike, we need a bass player, so since your dad plays bass, then you're it. So after the music started, by a bass and an amp, which was kind of hilarious. But Barry Keane was the drummer, Barry's Gordy Lightfoot's drummer for all these years, and a big studio guy. And Paul Gross was a guitar player who started Phase One Studios. So a lot of us have done, and I'm whoever I am, and so a lot of us out of that little high school band did okay. But started to get serious about it, I guess, after high school, and started playing in rhythm and blues bands, because that's really what's in Toronto back then. You were either kind of a rock pop Beatles guy or a Rolling Stones Memphis type guy. I'm playing Midnight Hour and Hold On I'm Coming and all that. If I had a nickel for every time I played Hold On I'm Coming, I tell you, that'd be incredible. But started in the R&B area, you know, and then rock came along into my life with Gil Moore, my partner in Triumph. He had a kind of a high school band that, you know, played high schools, and he asked me to fill in. He was in between bass players, and I was doing jingles then. And I said, no, I can't do it. And he said, oh, come on, it's only for 3 weeks or whatever. You know all the songs, it'll be easy. So I said, oh, okay. And then I started to get the bug of playing again, and it was kind of fun. We had a great guitar player in that band named Freddie Keeler, who was one of the original great guys in Toronto. Him and Dominic Triano and Joey Michelon, sorry. Anyway, so finally, after maybe 6-8 months of that, you know, I said to Gil, if you want to be serious, why don't we start a real band instead of this stuff? So, which we did. We kind of disbanded the high school band and went and got a record deal with Attic Records.
Still believe in the power of rock and roll music.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.
Hey, by the way, Daniel's a good guy, okay? He's a really good guy. He knows his stuff.
Thank you.
I hate that guitar, but I can play that in one scale.
Don't you dare laugh.
You know, I try to embrace the rock and roll spirit in the sense of I do everything self-funded and independently made with no oversight. As such, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching.